Yuck, what an ugly day to fly. Hello everyone, in today's video we're going to be taking a look at flying in the rain. Now when I was a beginning pilot and I just recently got my pilot private license, I'm like, alright, I can't wait to fly. And then all of a sudden one day I was called upon to go ahead and, let's do some flying today. We need to get checked out on a plane. Cool. So the forecast for that day involved some possible rain squalls. I said, are we even allowed to fly in the rain? And the answer actually is, yeah, you can fly in the rain, but there's a couple little catches, and we're actually going to be taking a look at those catches today in our lovely little Cirrus from the nice, safe, and very, very dry comfort. The first problem you have to worry about when rain, of course, is getting the rain on your leather seats. When people come in that little door, you're going to hear that as it bumps into absolutely everything. Does that affect anything? No, except for the fact that maybe you get mold or you get really frustrated that people are damaging your upholstery or anything along those lines. The next issue we have to deal with in rain, and this is a big one, is being able to get the rain clear of the windshield. Now, one of the questions I was actually asked recently by a passenger I was taking around is they said, do we have windshield wipers on the plane? And I said, no, we don't have windshield wipers on the plane. And you're probably going, wait, what? Actually, it's not that big of a deal, and we'll show you why in a minute. Next concern, of course, and this is probably the most critical concern of all, is going to be the loss of visibility. Remember, when you're flying in the rain, there's a good chance that your minimums are actually going, oh, look at that. Yeah, so your minimums could actually drop below what you can legally fly in. I can tell you right now, looking at this rain, if I weren't IFR qualified or rated and current, we just wouldn't fly. We'd just sit here and shut the airplane off and go back up to the clubhouse and probably reminisce about some other silly things that we happened. But what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and ignore all those concerns, and we're just going to go ahead and take the rain here and open it up just a tiny bit. Again, just take the edge off, so it's like, a gentle rain. Yeah, that's a gentle rain right now. The other thing you want to watch out for is look at how low our clouds are. I'm actually going to raise the clouds up just a tiny bit, just to put us into good enough for class echo airspace. So now that we've dealt with the visibility problem, we have a brand new problem that you're probably familiar with, but you just don't realize it. And that's the fact the ground is now wet. One of the things I completely forgot about the first time I went flying when everything was wet was the fact that your brakes on an airplane aren't anti-lock brakes. So when you hold the brakes in a real plane, you hear the skirt, 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 skirt. And usually what happens is, and it didn't do that to me, I wasn't going very quick, is it going to do the skirt, skirts? Hold the brakes. No. Normally, you'd lock the brakes up properly, and the whole plane would start jerking left and right, and no matter how fast you got with your pedals, you'd lock the wrong one up, and then the opposite tire locks, and of course, there's also the possibility of hydroplaning. We're going to ignore that because flight sim only affects our braking distance. They don't affect our braking dynamics. It's just one of those things we want to watch out for. So let's go ahead and head over there. And the other common question people ask when flying in the rain is they say, does the rain affect the performance of the airplane? And as a general rule, no, it does not affect the performance of the airplane. As a matter of fact, you could have some interesting compressibility effects because of rain. You could also have some interesting cooling effects because of rain that may actually improve certain aspects of your flight. But in a general rule, and I'll demonstrate this in about 2 hot seconds here, is the fact that the aircraft is not really affected performance-wise either by the engine or by the actual aerodynamics of the aircraft. Go ahead and push that throttle all the way forward. I'm building up 100% power. No problem. I release the throttle, and we're going to get rolling. One of the interesting things you got to watch out for in takeoff if you have puddles is it's very, very likely for that puddle to basically suck your wheel in, and it causes your plane to do one of these things. You're lovely hydroplaning, so you have to be really, really mindful of that. So let's get going. We're going to get up to a rotation speed. Cirrus, go! One of my favorite things that whenever you fly with a heavy plane, you're doing a lot of passengers, it's very, very likely for the stall alarm to go off on the way up. That always makes them panic just a little bit, unless they don't know what it means, in which case you're safe to go. But as you can see, as soon as the plane gets up to speed, the windshield wiper need is gone. We're too fast. We basically go through the rain, and it goes around us, like a nice little bubble kind of a protection. One thing you're noticing right away, though, is that lack of visibility. Believe it or not, we are still in a VFR condition. I know you're looking at this window going, are you kidding me? That's a VFR? Yeah. That's still VFR. I can still, number one, see the ground, and number two, I have a 3-mile visibility. I can see that mountain, and that mountain's 4.5 miles away. So even though these conditions look horrifying, I can still legally fly in them. But as we saw in the beginning, you saw how incredibly likely it is to run into a scenario where we run out of visibility, and now we're no longer legal. So that's another thing you want to think about. The final issue we want to be concerning about ourselves about, other than the fact that obviously we got visibility concerns, is one other issue that occurs whenever you have a lot of water. And that comes with icing. So if we come down here real quickly, you'll notice our outside air temperature is 13 Celsius. At sea level, by the way, it was 15 Celsius. When you have water and you have freezing temperatures, you get something nasty. You guessed it right. Ice. One of the scary things that we always have to remember about as pilots is as the altitude increases, the temperature decreases. So at sea level, it can actually be quite comfortable. But as we start to climb to higher and higher altitudes and the air starts to drop in temperature, we might start to see things like this start to form on our windshield here. And I'm actually noticing you're getting a little tiny bit on the leading edge. It's actually really not that bad. This is all clear ice. This isn't rime ice. So I'm not worried about it too much yet. But the problem is in the real world, by the time we see the ice has already significantly started to build up on the entire part of the plane. I actually switched to front view here. Everything's looking pretty good as far as ice accumulation goes. It's mostly on the windshields. One of the first ways you know your ice goes is usually your pitot heat will immediately, if it's not on, you'll see a drop in airspeed will kind of be the number one kick. A lot of times people panic as soon as they see that happen and they run over here and they start mashing all the airframe anti-ice. You can flip on the pitot heat control. But at the end of the day, aircraft aren't necessarily designed to be flying in major icing environments. Even if they're designed to fly into known icing, it's still possible to basically run through it and become an iceberg and get dropped right out the bottom. One of the nice things, especially for our scenario here, is if we simply lost a little bit of altitude, we'd be able to safely come back down, melt the ice, and then continue our flight. It's just one more thing people forget, because let's say they're traveling 14 to 15,000 feet, all of a sudden you find yourself quite cold, and of course that rain that was just rain down here is now basically freezing ice, and it's going to be causing all sorts of problems for us. So let's go ahead and take a look at the last little challenge here. Our final challenge is going to be when we go to land the plane. As I was kind of hinting at a little bit earlier, when we go to land a plane in a situation where you have this much precipitation coming down on you, let me go ahead and crank up the little scare just a tiny bit here. That's such a low amount. There we go. Oh man, that's only 5%. You should see what 100% looks like. So when we're coming in for landing like this, first of all, we're still almost legal because our visibility is not quite enough for this airspace. But the reality is all that rain is accumulated on that runway. And when we go to use it, regardless of how good our braking technique is, and especially this is very relevant in the real world, we're going to expect it to take a longer time to come to a complete stop. So I'll go ahead and pop a couple knops of flaps in. Knops of flaps. What's a knop of flap? A knop of flap, I swear. It's a new kind of flap. It's even better than the old flaps. So we're going to put a couple notches of flaps in. We're just going to kind of do the world's longest landing here. So remember, all that water is, floating over the top of the plane. It's not really having that much of an impact on our actual performance here. Obviously, if there's wind shear or something like that, we have to worry about it. Visibility issues. This is 1.5 mile runway, so you can get a feel for the distance. But what would happen is, in the real world especially, is when you go to stomp on those brakes, like I was saying earlier, it is not going to tolerate that very well. You're going to end up basically locking it up. So what you have to actually do when you land the plane to be safe is you have to treat all landings like they're soft field landings. So what we do after we come down, like I've done now, is we actually have to keep the front wheel gently off the ground and then make sure we're applying enough back force on it with minimal braking effort. Now, I don't know about you, but if you probably looked about where I actually touched down here, the 1,000-foot marker was that giant white square that we missed just a few moments ago. I basically doubled my typical landing there. And again, I was being very careful. And you can also tell that our ground here is nearly as saturated as it could be if I cranked everything up. But it's still valuable to go ahead and keep that in the back of your mind, especially if you're in an airline or a fighter, when normally, your landings are so-so, and now you suddenly find yourself in a position where you might run out of runway. But other than that, enjoy.